Good morning. We shall begin. Good morning. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So why don't we chant this verse before the class? Can somebody help me with that? Why do we chant that Om Namo before this class? Where does that verse come from? Yes?
Bhagavatam, where Narada Muni teaches this to Dhruva Maharaj or Kala Maharaj. Not sure.
Okay. Well, we will then ask the audience to help us. Why do we chant such a verse? And what's the significance of it? Yes?
This is just my guess. I think we took this verse before we were reading Srimad Bhagavatam because we're offering our respects to the Srimad Bhagavatam as the incarnation of Krishna himself.
Okay, that's a good answer. What else? Any other things? Before we go to our resident scholar, she knows I'm going to call on Prabhupada Priya, so I'll say Prabhupada Priya.
Well, it's kind of the official invocation for the Bhagavatam, which is mentioned just before the very first verse of the Bhagavatam. And it establishes the subject matter of the book and also the appropriate word for approaching that subject matter.
Exactly. All nice answers, but it's saying, you know, why are we even sitting here? I mean, could still be in bed. Looking, yes, I'm seeing that. Some people are. It's saying, my Lord, you're the all-pervading personality. I mean, it's not impersonal. And I offer you my respect. So it's when you meet someone, let's say, for example, we had the 50th Or was it Latin? And all of a sudden, Sanskrit spoken, that means darker skinned people might have been in the Garden of Eden. Oh my God, that's horrible. Yes, racism. That was considered horrible. And it shook up the core of Europe. So what did Europe do? They invented a new theory that the Aryans from India came from Europe. And they debated this. Some said they came from the Caucasian Mountains. Some said they came from Persia. Some said they came from Greek. Then finally, and the intellects of Europe were debating this for 100, 200 years, where the Aryans came from, because they couldn't have been these darkies in India. No way. This is standard racism, of course. And so they were debating this issue and debating it till finally one not very nice person decided that I'll tell you who the original Aryans are. And who said that? Hitler. And he adopted the swastika, which was the symbol in India of good fortune. And he made that the symbol of the Nazi Party. After World War II, people were not in a mood to debate who were the original Aryans, except for the Aryan Nation in America, kind of an offshoot of the Nazi Party that still exists in America and does things like invade the Capitol on January 6th and things like that is what they do. But that debate ended, but still there was the Aryan invasion. So let me see, did the Aryans come from Europe was the question. Then one of our devotees, Edwin Bryant Adwaita Das, wrote a dissertation. And in this dissertation, which was published as a book, a dissertation at Columbia University, he challenged that. He said, we really don't know that the Aryans came because there's no evidence. For example, they claim the Vedas were written, let's say, well, whenever. But according to the scholarship that existed before World War II, the Vedas were written 300 years before the Aryan invasion. Now, look at America. 300 years before now, we have history. We know, the Vikings came. We know Columbus came. We know these things. But imagine then there's not one mention in the Vedas, all these extensive literatures of people migrating from another place. So this Aryan invasion was just a kind of racism. And then after that, when Edwin Bryant put out his book, it ended the debate. And no longer was the intellectual debate that went on, where did the Aryans come from? Now, the answer of where the people from India came from in migrations, we don't know the precise details, but we know this racist theory was disavowed. So I'm giving a little history here because what we're trying to do is deal with the word Aryan. And now putting the word Aryan in its proper context, it means people who are high class, people who are civilized, and people who are civilized act in certain ways. So now we're going to get down to our chapter here and see if these people act civilized or not. So in chapter 9, now I got to give a context to what we're talking about here. In this context, chapter 18, I meant, Canto 9, chapter 18, in this context, we're building up to the 10th canto when Krishna appears. So this is a dynasty. And what dynasty did Krishna appear in? Yadu. And so in the next chapter, we will introduce the personality Yadu. And we'll find out who Yadu is and what the Yadu dynasty means. Okay, I'm supposed to eat this? Oh, okay. So we're kind of going to work up to that. And so all these names and everything, why are we doing this genealogy? We're kind of building up to Krishna coming. Now we build up to Krishna coming in 9 cantos in various ways. We build up in the first 4 cantos with philosophy and the nature of the cosmos and many subjects. Then we get to the fifth canto, which is saying, wow, if you were a demigod and I could give you the eyes of a demigod just for a moment, what would the world look like? And it's absolutely bewildering. Just like Krishna appeared in the universal form in front of Arjuna, and Arjuna became very bewildered. And said, Krishna, give me back your regular form. This is too much for me. So the fifth canto kind of gives us a little bit, oh my God, moment. And then we go back into the story. So halfway through the Bhagavatam, we get a wake-up call. Now, that said, many of the mysteries of the fifth canto are in fact resolvable, and that's what we do at the Bhaktivedanta Institute. But that'll be for question and answer time or another class. Then we get into 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th canto. We're building up to Krishna coming. We're telling various stories. The Bhagavatam is always a story within a story, sometimes within a story within a story. Why stories? Because in Kali Yuga, we do a lot better with stories and philosophy. So we present philosophy through stories. And that's explicitly discussed in conversations with Narada Muni and Vyasadeva. So we're building up to it. Then in this canto, we're getting close to Krishna coming. And in the 9th canto, we have the story about this King Yayati. And he met his wife, Devyani, in an unusual place. Does somebody know where they had their first date? Where? In a well. Now, sometimes we do consider Grahastha life similar to a deep, dark well. That metaphor has been used, but that's not what we're talking about. In a deep well. And the king was doing what kings do, doing his military training in the forest. And he came across the well and wanted something to drink. And he goes, looks down the well, and there's a naked lady in the bottom. That was an unusual thing. And he was a very handsome king, and she was a very beautiful lady. And he immediately threw down his top cloth for her to cover herself, being an Aryan gentleman, and was able to reach in and pull her out of the relatively shallow well, but one she could not climb out of, and pull her out of the well. And she said, well, you have seen me in my birthday suit, and you've rescued me. So now I think we should wed. And he agreed. It was an unusual wedding in that by the laws in that time of how weddings are done, it was not a wedding that was supposed to take place. She was a Brahmin's daughter, Sukacharya's daughter, and he was a Kshatriya. Those days, that was not considered, as we would say, kosher. But anyway, that was done. So, so now we'll get to today's verse. Let's go to the verse. Yes, we're at the verse. Who would like to chant the verse? Well, I preserve my voice.
Alvo paratam anmatmanam manaturuta buddha. Okay, then we'll go on with I took a long introduction, so we'll jump right into translation. Sukadev Goswami continued, because such a marriage is not sanctioned by regular principles, King Yayati, who was very religious, did not like it, but because it was arranged by providence and because he was attracted by Devyani's beauty, he accepted her request to marry her. So, purport. According to the Vedic system, the parents would consider the horoscopes of the boys and girls who were to be married. One time, one senior devotee was getting a relationship with someone I introduced him to. We had a flower business in New Ramanreti. The whole front of New Ramanreti was 20 acres of daylilies. And that's how in the 90s, the project was financed. So I'd started this business, and one lady had worked for me in our office. And she was introduced her to a godbrother of mine who was looking for a wife, and they were getting along very well. Very well. And she said to me, what's the next step? So I said, well, you should go to so-and-so and ask him for his chart. Seems reasonable, doesn't it? And she goes, yes. I said, not the horoscope chart, the chart of accounts. What do you care what his stars are? Does he have any money? So she calls him up. And we're talking as I do every day. And she said, I'd like your chart. And he goes, oh, well, my birthday was. He says, no, your chart of accounts. Because she was very naive and took me seriously. Then I get a call from this devotee. Brahma, what did you just do? Still think the chart of accounts might be more useful because who knows these things very accurately nowadays. But anyway, but now we'll get back to the horoscope because Yavati was a little more classy than me. So if according to astrological calculations, a boy and girl were compatible in every respect, the match was yotaka and the marriage would be accepted. Even 50 years ago, system was current in Hindu society, regardless of the affluence of the boy or the personal beauty of the girl. Without this astrological compatibility, the marriage would not take place. Oops, that was the reverse of what I recommended. Oh, well, I guess I missed out, got that one wrong. Anyway, a person is born in one of three categories, known as Deva Gana, Manusha Gana, and Rakshasa Gana. In different parts of the universe, there are demigods and demons. And in human society, some people resemble demigods, where others resemble demons. If according to astrological calculations, there was a conflict between a godly and a demoniac nature, the marriage would not take place. In other words, we're looking, are these people have the same value system? Do they have similar values? There are 5 areas of compatibility between a couple, according to psychology. And so astrology was looking at these. The 5 areas are, and any of you who are single and will eventually be married, these are the 5 areas you're going to look at. And you want to see, are we compatible in these 5 areas? On the 1 to 5 scale, nobody has all 5s. But if you have a bunch of 1s, you got a problem. And astrology would predict these things. These 5 areas are you spiritually compatible? Do you have the same value system? Are you emotionally compatible? Can you talk to each other? Are you behaviorally compatible? Do you like doing some of the same things? Are you intellectually compatible? Can you talk about things? And are you physically compatible? Are you attracted to each other? So these are the kind of things that astrology would be looking at. So similarly, there were calculations of pratiloma and anuloma. Pratiloma means, like in this marriage, where it was a mismatch. A Brahmin girl, according to that, in those times, did not marry a Kshatriya. Now, why don't we do these things nowadays? Somebody answer that one. It's Kali Yuga, and there's something special about Kali Yuga. Yes. Yes, yeah, you Prabhu.
We focus on chemistry more so sometimes than compatibility.
Yeah, we do. That's physical becomes the number one criteria. Then when the endorphins wear off, you say, how did I end up with this person? Yes, Prabhu. Yes, exactly. You said we're all born Sudras. So this idea of Patriloma doesn't work nowadays. It's not applicable. Everyone is kind of, it's Kali Yuga, and everyone is mixed. There's no one pure this or pure that, hardly anyone like that. So the central idea that the boy and girl on an equal level, the marriage would be happy, whereas inequality would lead to unhappiness. Now this there, Prabhupada emphasizes there to be a team. One time, Prabhupada sent a letter to Prafula Mukhi, and he said, you are the better half. And she immediately posted it on her refrigerator so her husband would see it every time he went to get something to eat. You are the better half. So Prabhupada saw it that way. Marriage means an equal relationship. Now, in equal doesn't mean everything's the same. Sometimes man may be dominant on this point, the woman may be dominant on that point, but it means a partnership where they work these things out. And that is the key emphasis here. And anytime you hear something different, we're dealing with an issue that's very, very important. Now, in Shastra, we find two things. There are descriptive and prescriptive. Can somebody tell me the difference? There are injunctions that are descriptive and prescriptive. Yes, Nanda.
It's telling you how people tend to do things, and the other one's telling you how you should do things.
Okay, say that one more time.
So one explains how people tend to do things, and one explains how they should do things.
Yeah, well, prescriptive says how we should do things, and descriptive is how things are done. So when we're reading the Bhagavatam, we have to be very, very careful. Is what's being done descriptive of how things were done at a particular time, or is it prescriptive of how it's best we do it? This requires intelligence and good brain tissue, which is why we try to eat well. So we have good brain tissue because it's not easy. The most dangerous thing in the movement, according to one very senior leader, I asked him, what's the most dangerous thing in the Krishna movement? I've told you this before. Some of you remember what I said? The most dangerous thing in ISKCON. Yes. Prabhupada says, because there's no brain there. Oh, he said this. Prabhupada probably said that also. He said many different things. And depends on the time, place, and circumstance. So it requires some good brain power to figure this out. So many things we look in the Bhagavatam are descriptive of what something was like at a particular time. Now I'm going to ask you a trick question. Very trick question. And we'll take a vote on this. At the time I'm reading here, which is roughly the time of the Mahabharata. Remember, only a few generations before Krishna came. So this is the time of the Mahabharata. Was that a Vedic culture? Who says yes? Who says no? Who doesn't know? Okay, Somebody want to tell me what the evidence was that it was not a Vedic culture? We seem to have more shrugs that way. Yes, Prabhupada Priya.
Well, this is just a speculation, but I was thinking that the whole reason that Krishna came was because there was a predominant rise of irreligion, and he came to reestablish the principles of religion because the disciplic succession had been lost, and so it seems like Vedic culture was kind of like a remnant.
Yeah, Krishna says,
remnant.
Krishna came to reestablish culture. That means at the time the Mahabharata occurred and the time of the events we're reading, the culture had been lost. So if you want to read the Mahabharata to learn so-called Vedic culture, guess what? Ain't gonna work. A lot of what we see is descriptive, not prescriptive. It's saying what it was like at the time, how things were done. And the Bhagavatam actually begins with an amazing story. In that story, how does the beginning of the Bhagavatam relate to apartheid in Africa, in South Africa? Ooh, what a interesting question. Yes, you want to, who wants to, you want to go for that, Prabhupada Priya? Does anybody know what apartheid is? In South Africa, up to about 20 years ago, it was ruled by the minority whites, and blacks virtually had no privileges. Now, Indians were considered colored. They were halfway between black and white. They had some privileges, and blacks had very few privileges, and whites had all privileges. And there were many, this ended with Nelson Mandela being freed from prison after 27 years and becoming president. So some history. So how does the apartheid, or let's get closer to home. Has anybody ever been to Wise's drugstore in Gainesville? Haven't been there. Okay, Wise's drugstore, there's a few left. There was one downtown. Now that's gone now. Wise's drugstore downtown was interesting in that you had two water fountains right next to each other. Why was that? Not that people were extra thirsty. Why two water fountains at Wise's drugstore in downtown Gainesville? Somebody know why? Yeah, racial segregation. It was one for whites and one for blacks. One was labeled white and the other was labeled colored. And the poor Indians couldn't figure out which one to use. So anyway, that was the reality of Gainesville. In the Gainesville Sun, they had a column. This is in the 50s and 60s. I've seen it. And the column was called Negro News. And it said everything that went on in East Gainesville, like B.B. King came to do a concert, very famous person. He would come here. And Gainesville, though, I have a lot of black entertainers here for a small town. Now that, none of you can guess why that was. Has to do with the Green Book. Yes, microphone, please.
Because there was a hotel that would allow Black people to stay there.
Yeah, and there were no hotels in all North Florida that would allow Black people to stay except in Gainesville. So if some big entertainer would come, they would have to stay in Gainesville. So they would do a performance while here. So a little Gainesville was a much tiny town then, would have all these famous Black entertainers. My parents' favorite singer when they grew up was Sammy Davis Jr. Who has heard of him? Okay. He was Black, had one eye, and had converted to Judaism. That was an unusual person. And he used to perform at major hotels like in Las Vegas, big marquee, Sammy Davis Jr. It would fill up. Every night would be sold out. But he could not stay at that hotel. He had to stay a little dump on the edge of town. These are true stories. This, you know, I'm not, I grew up with this. So I'm telling you facts here, not fiction. So the Bhagavatam begins with a curse. Who cursed who? Shringi, Maharaj Parikshit. And Shringi was born in a Brahmin family and then claimed to be a Brahmin, but he was what they call it, Brahma Bandhu, friend of the Brahmins. He really wasn't a Brahmin. So Krishna says in the Gita, Chatur Varnam are determined by two things. What are they? Guna and karma. You never, any place in legitimate Shastra, find Chatur Varnam determined by Janma, birth. It doesn't exist. But that is the cause of Kali Yuga, to say that by this birth, I claim a particular right. Like, for example, I just in Philadelphia visiting my voice doctor who operated on me to fix something. And his father was a famous voice doctor, and he's a famous voice doctor. But I wouldn't let him operate on me unless he became qualified, not because his father was famous. But he also became qualified, so he operated on me, and fairly successfully. Though I could have made a lot of money from that operation. When I had it 3 years ago, I had to pledge, I had to, for 1 month, not say one word, could only chant in my mind. And people were willing to bet 1,000 to 1 that I would not keep my vrata. I should have gone with that. Anyway, but we don't gamble, so could have retired off of that. So I saw this doctor, not because his father was a great doctor, but that was good. His father was a great doctor, and he became a great doctor. And the only one in America who could perform that rare surgery was this one doctor. No one else knew how to do it. And he was able to do this. So, but he also became qualified. That's the key. So the Kali Yuga begins with saying, by this body, I claim a particular quality. Now, we're talking here about people born Brahmin, but people born Brahmin generally were trained to be Brahmins. But just because they were born, it doesn't make them a Brahmin. That's one of the things that's being taught here. So we'll continue. The central idea is that the boy and girl on equal level, the marriage will be happy, where inequality leads to unhappiness. Because care is no longer taken, we find many divorces. Indeed, divorce has now become a common affair. Although formerly one's marriage would continue lifelong, and the affection between husband and wife was so great, the wife would voluntarily die when her husband died, or remain a faithful widow throughout her entire life. Now, of course, that's not possible, for human society has fallen to the animal level. Marriage now takes place by agreement, tampati, hetu. The word biaruchi means agreement. If the boy and girl agree to be married, it takes place. When the Vedic system is not observed, marriage frequently ends in divorce. Jai Prabhupada. Oh my God. So, I'm going to pause here, see if there are any questions on what I've read, anything that you want discussed. Oh, yes, Shamala. Microphone, please.
I have a question off of something you said. So my question is, you were talking about descriptive and prescriptive statements, and it seems like sometimes, and this is a kind of a controversial question, but it seems like sometimes Prabhupada takes a descriptive statement and then in his purport makes it prescriptive to us. For example, like a couple of weeks ago, there was a class and stirred up some controversy or some confusion because of statements Prabhupada made about women and marriage and so on.
Oh, that was the one about the grouch.
Yeah.
Yes, the grouch, the Varsamuni. I think I shared with you last time, if Groucho Muni was on Sesame Street, which character would he be? Come on, you all know this. Which one? And where would he live? You got it. Okay, good. Who here has seen Sesame Street? Come on, you all have to know this. You grew up with it, at least in America. They have Sesame Street in India? Came later. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So all the Indians are culturally deprived, missing Sesame Street. Okay. Oh, okay. And today is Ekadasi. Okay, so in the purport to that verse I was talking about, Prabhupada says a woman should tolerate a grouchy husband. Now, was that descriptive or prescriptive? Good question. Is that your question? And the answer is mostly descriptive. There was one devotee joined the movement. She's passed on now, Sunita, wonderful, wonderful devotee. And she was married to a Brijabasi. She's Indian lady from maybe New Delhi. She married a Brijabasi man. And then she met the devotees and decided to become a devotee. And her husband used to beat her, and he was nasty and horrible. Prabhupada said, divorce him. Divorce him and become a devotee. There were other cases where Prabhupada's sister, who was affectionately known as Pishama, Bhavatrini was her name, but known as Pishama, she had a husband who was not vegetarian and not at all devotional, and she was a disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta, but she stayed with her husband. So in one case, that was glorious. She stayed with her nasty husband till he passed on. And in the other case, Prabhupada said, leave him so you can take up a higher service. So these are descriptive matters, depending on time, place, and circumstance. They're not prescriptive for everybody. Prabhupada has a particular language style. We all have a language style. For example, I'm from New Jersey. So for us, English is a second language. I think our linguists will confirm that. So there are different literary styles. Prabhupada's literary style, and he has one, everyone has one, is from Victoria English. His English is Victorian era English. And that kind of literary style is, let me see, to describe it, is very directive. It's a directive style. So when we see Prabhupada's literary style, should this and should that, it's a way of speaking. But when we look at the many instructions and letters and conversations, and we pull all this together in an integrated way, we see that much of what Prabhupada would say that way was descriptive, and what's prescriptive requires a lot of intelligence to figure out. That's why we have association devotees, so we can discuss these things and make this very important distinction between descriptive and prescriptive. And it's not hard to do theoretically, but practically it takes a lot of work to do it. Anybody have any question on that, or any other on descriptive? Yes, Christina.
I have a comment on language, because I really like what you said about Prabhupada's literary and linguistic style. So yeah, what I found in studying Shastra and reading Prabhupada's books and even older works is that you really got to remember that the meanings of words change within, one particular language. So for example, the word gay in English used to mean like happy and festive.
Yes.
And now it means homosexual. And that's like a very definite change. And also that like when you're looking at translations from Sanskrit to English, not only do you have like the words in English changing meaning, but also that a lot of times words in Sanskrit do not have a one-to-one correlation with words in English that they are translated into. So for example, rasa being translated into mellow. Why is that? Well, it's like, well, mellow has this archaic meaning that has to do with the juice of fruit. And like, how do I know that? Because I looked it up on, an etymological dictionary. But like a lot of, you might look at that, you might come to that and be like, rasa, mellow, relationship? Like, what do all these words have in common? And it might be very strange. So I found that I mean, you don't necessarily have to like know all these things or have to go to an etymological dictionary all the time, but just kind of keeping an open mind about the fact that like the word that you see, which has a very particular meaning for you, you know, in this particular language, in this particular time, it's not as rigid and ironclad as you think it is. So there's always kind of that, there's always needs to be that room for, yeah, just for like the benefit of the doubt and for just understanding that things are not always as they seem.
That's interesting. You use the word mellow. You know, I had a conversation for a few days with Prabhupada. Who here has read Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers? Who has heard of the book? Who has not heard of it? Okay, just curious. And in it, Prabhupada at one point was trying to translate the word rasa. So he said, he used the word rasa, and I said, I don't understand. And he said, mellow. I said, I still don't understand. Because I didn't understand the use of that particular word. So then Shamasundra's secretary kind of explained it to me, and then I understood. But so words do change like that. For example, there's one controversial verse where Prabhupada says, well, a woman likes a man who's expert at rape. A very controversial verse. But the word rape used in that context is a very archaic use, which means seduced. And doesn't mean all women, but sometimes women like a man who's very seductive. We see it. Anybody who's read love novels or seen love movies or seen a soap opera, that's what it's all about. In fact, it's almost always about that. So that theme is repeated over and over again, but it's an archaic use. Jayadvaita Swami said to me, because he was the editor, if I had been the editor of that canto, he wasn't for whatever, I think he was shifted to back to Godhead, I would have removed that, because Prabhupada wanted his editors to remove controversial things that would not be understood in our particular language. And Jayadvaita said, darn, I wish I'd been the editor then. I would have avoided that whole controversy, because I would have cut that, and Prabhupada wanted that cut. But Prabhupada leaned on it. Conundrum. Is what Prabhupada says true or false? Krishna's writing the books. Got people thinking a little here. Somebody help me out here before I bloop. I got a problem. Yes, a Prabhupada Priya. Gopal. Yeah, yeah.
Mama might have given him the intelligence to write those books.
But does Paramatma not know English grammar? Let's have Prabhupada Priya give a shot at this. I mean, you're right. You're right on that, Gopal. That is correct.
I would say that Krishna was inspiring him with the absolute truth in terms of the theological and philosophical content, but he wasn't giving him the exact words to say.
Exactly. Exactly. Obviously so. So some people, there's two great dangers. When you're driving down the road, if you veer off the road and you go in the ditch on the left side of the road or the right side of the road, doesn't make a difference. You are still in a ditch. So if you overpraise Prabhupada, that everything he said is completely perfect and nothing needs any adjustment, time, place, circumstances, you missed Prabhupada's instruction. On the other ditch, on the other side of the road, if you say, well, I don't have to follow anything Prabhupada or the other acharyas say, because they don't know what they're really talking about, and I know better, then you're in a ditch on a different side of the road. Both ways you're in the ditch. So the way to do this, again, comes back to the principle. It takes some intelligence. How do you get intelligence? Well, knowledge comes with the mode of goodness, and that means we have to get in the mode of goodness. How do you get in the mode of goodness? Well, you rise early and, chant Hare Krishna and eat prasadam and hang out with devotees and all kinds of things like that. When I said to Prabhupada in my conversation, so, well, I have trouble following all the principles because people I live with don't. He says, well, then why are you living with them? I thought, good idea. So I resigned my position. And it's by association. So the first thing to get the intelligence to understand these finer details is good association. If you have good association, naturally you're going to follow a sadhana that nourishes your brain. You're going to eat food that nourishes your brain, and you're going to avoid things that drain your brain. Simple as that. With that, any last question? We'll stop here. I don't want to starve people on the Ekadasi because you're already going to starve partially. Oh, yes. You always ask good questions, so I'm curious for this one.
Hare Krishna. I just wanted to point out, even in this purport, you have to apply some hermeneutical rigor, because right at the end it says, when the Vedic system is not rigidly observed, marriage can frequently end in divorce. Now, one person might think, okay, how do I rigidly observe the Vedic system? Maybe my wife, who was a chartered accountant before we got married, maybe now she needs to make cow dung patties all day, and that's the Vedic system. Another person might read the purport, and I would argue more correctly conclude that rigidly observing the Vedic system just means not only having physical attraction, but making sure that there's other connections as well, emotional connections, intellectual.
The five I gave, yeah.
Yeah.
The Vedic system, there's the word Vedic culture is not found anywhere in the Vedas. I mean, it's a legitimate word, and even Prabhupada used it, but it's not found in the Vedas. So sometimes we make an imaginary Vedic culture. And the Vedic system simply says, as said earlier, here is the Vedic system. I'll read it to you right from the purport. The central idea, the boy and girl on an equal level, the marriage will be happy, while inequality would lead to happiness. So people of a similar, people who are compatible should get married. That's almost brainless to think that. Now, there is in most traditional societies, marriages were arranged. I mean, people would have to consent in most cases, not all, but marriages were arranged. So when I was in India, I was very bewildered by the idea of arranged marriages. I was a romanticist, and the idea of an arranged marriage I found abhorrent. So there was this one lady in town who I knew, and she had actually been divorced, which is very rare in the village where I lived in India. And I liked visiting her house with her, and she lived with her father and at that time. And I liked visiting because they had a refrigerator. And the refrigerator was something I never had in India. I mean, didn't have anything really. So a refrigerator was a great luxury. And so I would ask her questions about society. And one question I asked is, you better explain arranged marriage to me. I can't get it. And she says like this, very wise words. Well, when you get married in a love marriage, and the husband and wife, they go to bed at night, and the wife can't sleep because the husband snores so loud. The whole bubble is burst. I mean, even if she's in the next room, the snoring is so loud, she can't sleep. Sure, some of you have parents who have had that issue. And if you have parents who have had that issue, or one of your parents snored so loud, I know one couple, devotee couple, like that. It's actually the wife who's a loud snorer. And you know them in Murfreesboro. You know who I mean. And he said to me, "You can't believe how hard it is to sleep. My wife is like a sawmill." And you know who I'm talking about. This couple, a wonderful devotee couple. I mean, we should make a reality show with them because being at their house is like being in a situation comedy. So this lady said to me, when you get a love marriage, your bubble bursts. When you have an arranged marriage, everything keeps getting better and better and improved because you tolerate these things because you didn't have that anticipation. So sometimes arranged marriage is better, sometimes love marriage is better. The way people who come to me for advice on this, what I say to them is, try to have someone help you find somebody compatible, but ultimately you have to make your own decision on that. Right now, we're at the point in our society where nobody knows the art of even good arrangements anymore. Somebody does astrology, one astrologer says this, and the other astrologer says that. It can be helpful information, but ultimately, when devotees come to me, I say, we will help, but you have to make your own decision. Existential responsibility. It's what made Sartre, for those who have read John Paul Sartre. He wrote one book called Nausea, and he was confronted with the existential reality of life. And without Krishna, his only response was, "This makes me nauseous." But that's another story for another class. With that, we'll stop here.